All right. Okay, well, that's noon. So why don't we go ahead and get started? Welcome, everybody, to another webinar here with NextUp Solutions. I see some familiar faces out there. That's nice. For a few of you, this might be a bit of a review even, but for others of you, welcome. We're going to talk about the 3 Scrum roles today. So let me go ahead and share my screen and we can begin. All right, so here we go. We'll start with just a couple of quick introductions. This is me. There's way too much stuff on this slide, but I put it all in one place so that you can forget it quicker because it's the least important thing that we'll talk about today. I am Dr. Patrick McConnell. You can call me Pat or Patrick because my PhD is irrelevant to everything that we're going to discuss in this webinar, so don't worry about it. I have been an Agilist for what goes for a long time in this business, well over a decade. I started off my journey as a product owner on Scrum teams building mapping applications, primarily for government agencies. And then I became a Scrum Master for a while, and then I stepped into full-time Agile coaching for a bunch of years, ultimately becoming the director of the Agile Center of Excellence at one of the gigantic government-focused system integrator companies here in the DC region. And for most of that time, I was also pursuing becoming a certified Scrum Trainer, which is a fairly difficult thing to do. There's less than 300 of us in the world. And I finally did that in 2018. And since then, I mostly just get to teach classes about Agile stuff and make grown-ups play silly games and have a lot of fun. And I also still get to do some coaching sometimes too. That's my Twitter on that slide, at @bowtieagility, which if you give it a follow, I promise is just Agile stuff. You won't see me yelling in an airline about luggage or something. Just Agile stuff, I promise. And if you do post anything about me or us on any of the socials, we would love it if you tagged us, hashtag NextUp Solutions with an S on the end so that we can see it. That'd be great. We are actually 2 entities under the same umbrella, Acceleration and NextUp Solutions. Acceleration is our tech internship and co-op practice where we put college students to work part-time in between their classes doing real software development and testing for real companies. But under the guidance of our expert mentors who teach them those crafts and keep them from blowing anything up. The companies that hire us get fantastic work done at great rates. The students get an amazing education and the experience that lets them go off to great careers. It ends up being kind of a win-win-win all the way around. So we're very proud of what we do at Acceleration. According to last year's Vault rankings, we were actually the #2 ranked tech internship in the country. So we're very proud of what we do there. So that's Acceleration. As for NextUp Solutions, we are a certified Agile training provider doing all sorts of great live taught, expert-led Agile courses, lots of Scrum Alliance certified courses, Kanban University, Scaled Agile, IC Agile, all sorts of great stuff. And we are a full service Agile coaching and collaboration partner, doing everything from helping new Agile teams get up and running or existing teams get better, to helping whole enterprises plan or improve Agile transformations at scale, to most importantly, helping Agile leaders develop into that space. And the effectiveness of leaders to nurture environments where Agile teams can grow and thrive is often a limiting factor in terms of how much value we get out of Agile teams. So that leg of that practice is very important too. All right. So enough of the introduction stuff. That's who I am and who we are. Let's go ahead and dive into the webinar topic, which is why you're really all here. We're going to talk about the roles on a Scrum team a bit today. I should say at the outset that periodically language changes. The Scrum Guide gets updated, which is always the official definition of what Scrum is at any one time. The most recent revision of the Scrum Guide actually changes the word roles to responsibilities. So now we talk about Scrum responsibilities on a team instead of Scrum roles. I'm still going to use the word roles though throughout this webinar because to me it makes a bit more sense and I find it's easier to explain that way. So at any rate, I know I'm slightly out of doctrine at this point, but it'll be okay. No one will die, I promise. All right, so let's start with a brief overview of what the 3 roles are. And to begin with, let's talk about the types of people who might want stuff from a Scrum team. Like let's say a team that's building software. Well, end users, of course, want stuff. Operators of the system, if that's somebody else, they want it to be easy to operate and maintain and not break a lot. If we're building with other teams, they have needs and interests. And of course, business owners or mission owners, whoever's paying for the work, whoever owns the budget, they have interests as well. And we could have all sorts of other various and nebulously defined stakeholders within the institution too. We could make this list super long. I just picked 5 examples, but there could be 20 different types of interested party in the work of this team. In Scrum, though, it doesn't really matter how long that list is, because all of those needs and wants are understood and rationalized and visualized by a single person that we call the product owner. We're going to dive in a little bit more into what they do in a few minutes. But for now, I would just like you to think of the product owner as the single ringable neck for deciding what a team does in what order. It's their job to listen to all of those voices, all of those interested parties, figure out what order do I need to make people happy in first, and most importantly, figure out what is the value that I'm supposed to be delivering in this team, and what is the best product vision to deliver that value. So that is the product owner role. And we want it to be one person so that they will actually make choices. If it's a committee, it's really, really hard to say yes or to say no to things. And then no one really knows what we're doing or why we're doing the things. That's confusing. So we want someone with absolute authority over the vision of the product in sprint long increments. Now, if you're familiar with Scrum, you know that a sprint is not a really long time. So it's not like we're giving one person absolute authority over the product forever. Typically, we're talking about like 2 weeks at a time. And that offsets that authority, which helps, because that way, yes, they have lots of authority, but if they're making the wrong choices, we'll know real soon, and then we can make a change. So that's why we want it to be one person, so they will make decisions, but also their authority is kind of time boxed in these short increments, which mitigates overall institutional risk of going in the wrong direction for too long. So that's the first of the 3 Scrum roles that we're going to talk about, product owner. Next up, we have developers, and these are the people who are going to actually build the thing, whatever it is. So if we're talking about, say, a software team, some of them have skills probably in software development. Others might be more focused on testing. Still another might be thinking about documentation or aspects of delivery and release management. So I don't know. We don't have sub roles inside of the developers group. We just call them all developers. Even if we're not doing software development, we call them developers. Collectively, they are all responsible for building the thing, whatever it is, for getting to done. And they are a self-organizing and self-managing team, which means once they understand what is to be done, they tell themselves how to get it done. They tell themselves who among them will do which parts. So that's the developers. Now, this is a relatively small group of people, typically less than 9. Anybody know why? Want to type in the chat? Why we want typically less than 9 developers on a Scrum team? Easier to communicate, Giovanni says. Yes, you're absolutely right. So we want this group to be self-organizing and self-managing. Carrie, you're right as well. Communication becomes difficult. It gets really, really, really hard to have a shared understanding of what are we doing, or understand when a choice was made or why we made a particular choice, when there are too many people in that group. Every time we increase the membership of that group by another person, the number of 2-person communication nodes on that, or channels on that group, get bigger and bigger and bigger geometrically. That's just kind of a function of math. So it is far harder for a 9-person team to be a team than an 8-person team, but still harder for a 10-person team than a 9-person team. And it just gets worse from there. So that's why we don't want too many developers on a Scrum team. We need a small team so that they get good at being a team. We don't, though, necessarily want them to be too small. And there isn't officially a lower limit anymore for Scrum teams. A long time ago, we used to say the rule was, this was 5 to 9 people. And then a few years back, the rule changed to 3 to 9. And now the rule is just typically less than 9. Less than 9 is a great rule, but I still get nervous under about 4 personally. It's not a rule, it's just kind of a guideline. And the reason for that is if there's too few developers on a Scrum team, first of all, it can be really hard to be cross-functional. We want this group to be a cross-functional team. That means as a group, they have all the skills and abilities needed to go from an idea to whatever done means in a single sprint, a couple of weeks or however long the team sprints are. It doesn't mean everyone on the team has to be able to do everything. It just means as a group, they can do all the things. If the group is too small, though, it might be really hard to be cross-functional with a team that only has, say, 2 developers on it. So I might need a few more people to actually get to cross-functionality as a group. The other problem with teams that are too small is that if I only have 2 developers on a Scrum team and one of them gets a cold, we are not going to meet our sprint goal. We are not going to finish backlog items. There goes the plan we had for that 2 weeks. So there's kind of a tension here. I want enough people, enough kind of a critical mass of people in the role of developer on a team that we can make plans for a sprint that are likely to be true. Not likely to get disrupted that much from one sprint to the next, but not so many people that we can't self-organize and self-manage. So that's the tension there. So that's the role of developers, the people who are going to actually do the thing and are as a group cross-functional and self-managing. Now, product owner and developers are co-equal partners. They are mutually accountable for outcomes on the team. And the reason for that is because they can't outperform each other. It doesn't matter how great the developers are if they get told to build the wrong stuff. Doesn't matter how great product vision is if the developers can't self-organize to carry it out. So we need those 2 points of view to inform each other. So they are co-equal on a Scrum team, but they have different authorities in their roles and responsibilities. The product owner owns the questions what and why and when. What are we building? Why should we build it? What's the value in it? And when, what order should we build this list of things in? That's up to the product owner. And they articulate that through this artifact in Scrum called the product backlog, which is just an ordered list of all the work that the team might do in a prioritized order based on business value or mission value. So what is in the list? What is the value of those things? What is the order of that list? Those are product owner questions. The developers, on the other hand, own the answer to the question, how? How should we build those things? What methods, what approaches, what tools, what tasks are we going to have to do to get those things done? And which of us as the developers will do which tasks? So that's what I mean by self-managing. The developers self-assign tasks to themselves and each other. Nobody else has to assign that work to them once they know what is to be done in a given sprint. So those are 2 of the 3 roles or responsibilities on a Scrum team, product owner and developers. The third role, if you've never done Scrum before, might seem like kind of a weird job, and that is the job of Scrum Master. And if you've never taken a CSM class, for example, you might not really understand what Scrum Masters do. They are not just a functionary. They don't just book rooms for people all day or move tasks around in Jira or something. They are not necessarily a builder. They're not a member of the developers building slices of product. They're also not doing all of the product backlog refinement work on behalf of the product owner or anything like that. That's not their role. The Scrum Master is really a team level coach. Their job is to help this group of people, the Scrum team, which includes product owner and developers, be the best possible Scrum team they can be, make reasonable choices about plans, create experimental adaptations from one sprint to the next to get better as a team, to own their own continual improvement, all those kind of things. And to help the environment around the team get better at being a place where Scrum teams can build and thrive. So that's what I mean by they are a team level coach. They are also a servant leader, which means, well, it's kind of also everybody else's job. It is explicitly the Scrum Master's job to look after the health and well-being of all of these people as individuals and as a collective. That means being a little bit in everybody's face every day saying, hey, what do you need? What do you need? What can I do for you? So that is the role of Scrum Master in a nutshell. Now, I could just talk at you about these 3 roles for another, oh, I don't know, 40 minutes, but that would not be very exciting. So instead, let's do this. I'm going to give everybody a link to a Miro board. All right, looks like this. If you want to click that link and then come back and look at my board for a second, here's what we're going to do. I'm going to break the class up into 3 teams. Let's do 4 teams. I'll do 4 teams here. And I'm just going to split you up randomly. Okay. Here's what I want you to do as a group. In your teams, looking at this Miro board here, I've created a whole bunch of sticky notes up top of things that might happen on a team, a Scrum team, that was, let's say, building software. Okay. What I want you to do is talk amongst your team members for a few minutes and move sticky notes onto the poster for which of the 3 Scrum roles you think would be most responsible for that thing, whatever it is. You might think something belongs on a couple of posters. That's okay. Just pick the one you think is most likely or most responsible for that behavior. Okay. If a card has already been moved onto another poster, tough, just work with the ones that are still there. But here, let me send you into breakout teams before we start moving stuff, whoever's moving stuff. Can you stop moving things for now? All right, there we go. So let me put these back. I want you to negotiate with your teams a bit. All right, so let me send you into breakout rooms. We'll go for just 5 minutes. And if you're not sure, you can guess or you can leave it to another team to move that note, and then we'll see what we come up with. So, all right, here we go, into breakout rooms just for 5 minutes. Go. Hi, Novella. Can I put you back in a room?
Recorded.
All right. Just waiting for everyone's audio to rejoin. Okay. All right, welcome back, everybody. Okay, so let's see what we've got here. If you want to come back and look at my screen in the Zoom share. So let's see how we did. Let's start with developers. Developers build the product. Yes, whatever it is, they're going to do the building. They're also going to do the validation. So they build it, they test it to whatever level it needs to be validated. Now, what kinds of validation need to occur might be a discussion between developers and the product owner and maybe other interested parties too. But carrying out the validation is going to be the responsibility of the developers. Also, they are a self-organizing team, as we talked about, which means they hold each other accountable. They self-assign tasks or negotiate with their teammates about who will do what, rather than having somebody micromanage them in 5-minute increments. So that's up to the developers too. And then lastly, if we're doing estimating, it is also the developer's job to do the estimating. The people doing the work have to own estimates, or else we can't expect that they would ever be true. So those are the 4 core behaviors of developers. Now, how those estimates get used in a planning tool might be something that someone else might do, like a product owner or others as well, but the estimates themselves have to come from developers. In terms of some of these other things here, performance reviews, not necessarily. In fact, I'm going to punt that one out here for now. Project schedules, I'm going to punt that one as well. Inject reality is on the line here, and I assume that means one or more groups thought that that would be both the developers and the Scrum Master. Yes, certainly we want everybody involved to be injecting reality, but I think it's more especially the role of Scrum Master, but I'll come back to that in a minute. So we talked about developers. Now let's swing over to the other side and talk about product owner. Let's see how we did with product owner. So refine backlog is first and foremost the core responsibility of the product owner. Backlog refinement, also sometimes called backlog grooming in the US, means what is in the product backlog? What items should be in that list? What ideas are we going to do at some point in the future, do we think? So that's backlog refinement. Backlog refinement is also having conversations with developers to make sure that we have a shared understanding of any particular backlog item. So we understand what is this thing and who is it for and how would we know if we're done with it? Is it possible? Is it small enough to fit in a sprint? All of those kinds of conversations we call backlog refinement. And the product owner is more responsible than anybody else in the Scrum team for making sure that backlog refinement happens and that backlog refinement discussions are effective. So that is definitely the responsibility of the product owner. Along with that would be prioritizing the backlog. So refining the backlog is what is in the list. Prioritization is what order is the list. What things should we do first versus later? What's going to deliver the most value soonest? Things like that. Along with that, they're also responsible for continually clarifying the vision for this product. That means understanding what is value in this context. How is the work of the team going to lead to value? Helping the team understand that, helping other people understand that, constantly refining the continuing vision for whatever the thing is that we're building in consultation with users and stakeholders or whoever it is that we need to be listening to and talking to. And then finally, it might help to explain the order that we intend to build things in with a lightweight communication tool like a product roadmap. And that is very often kind of the role of a product owner to build out to, using their notions of priority and value and squaring that against developers' notions of item by item estimates and timelines. So those are the 4 core behaviors of product owner. As far as release plans go, sometimes that's the product owner. It doesn't necessarily have to be. So I'm going to move that one out here. But all right, good. We did get the 4 core behaviors of product owner. Let's see if we got the 4 core behaviors of a Scrum Master. First and foremost, they're a team coach. And we talked about that already. It's their job to help this group of people be the best Scrum team that they can be, help them continually improve, help them get through the cycle of forming, storming, norming, performing, or whatever model of team formation and advancement you want to use. Facilitating the team activities, so things like sprint planning and daily scrums and reviews and retros, so that we accomplish the goals of each of those activities. Those are healthy team events. So yes, team level coach, first and foremost. Scrum Masters also own impediments. An impediment is any obstacle, anything that's popped up that's keeping us from finishing a thing, or that's keeping us from getting better as a team. So we call those impediments or blockers or obstacles. And Scrum Masters are officially responsible for getting those things resolved, whatever they are. That doesn't mean that a Scrum Master is personally responsible for fixing all issues. It just means it's their job to get them fixed by whoever is the best person to fix those things. Next up, I like to talk about Scrum Masters as reality injection agents. And yes, it's good if developers can do that too. It's also good if product owners can do that. But I especially expect Scrum Masters to do it. A big important thing for Scrum Masters to be doing all the time is to tell the truth and to ask questions that help us point to the truth. So for example, asking a team, hey team, we keep promising people we're going to finish 30 things in the next sprint, but we've never done more than 6. So why do we keep pretending we're going to do 30? That's the kind of reality I would expect a Scrum Master to inject in conversations. They don't own plans, they don't own estimates, but it's their job to make sure that all voices that need to be heard are heard in those conversations, that we're remembering the past, things like that. And then finally, the most important behavior of a Scrum Master is servant leadership. As I said before, looking out for the health and well-being of these people as individuals and as a collective. Because if we don't honor teams as being collections of individual humans, we just grind through people and burn them out, and we don't get value out of teams. So honoring the humanity of people, looking out for their well-being as an end in of itself, is part of how we get to high performance and value out of teams. So that is not just serving people, that is also serving the organization and serving whatever type of value it is we're trying to deliver. And it's the Scrum Master's job, among others, to make sure that we're remembering that in our day-to-day interactions. Now, we also put reports and metrics up here, and I'm going to move that one to the side as well. Often Scrum Masters do collect or collate reports and metrics. It is not officially their job. It isn't actually officially any of the other 2 roles' jobs either. All these other things that I punted off to the side, those may be things that have to happen in an organization around a particular team. They aren't really a part of Scrum. And I would put these other 4 stickies on an additional poster that's not up here called other stuff, which means whose job is it to do performance reviews? I don't know. That's tangential to Scrum. Ideally, none of the people in the Scrum team are each other's boss. They're all co-equal kind of workers together in that group. Who is their boss is an open question. And whether or not we even do performance reviews is an open question. But yeah, hopefully none of these 3 roles are doing them for each other at least. Who knows? Same for project schedules. If we have to do some big integrated master schedule type artifact, we need to recognize that probably it's going to change a whole lot. That's a lot of why we're using Agile methods, because we don't really control the future. We're going to stop pretending that we do. Whose job would it be to build and maintain that might vary from one team to the next. Ideally, it would be an artifact that is kind of self-updated based on reordering things like our backlog or definitions of what's in release, things like that. Someone in the chat is saying, well, that explains why most of our group's discussion was around those. Yes, I intentionally threw in some red herrings, so I hope I didn't misdirect you too much. The same goes for release plans. How much release planning is necessary probably depends a lot on how complicated is our enterprise, how hard is it to get things out the door. A product owner tends to be very involved in that kind of thing, but they're probably not the only ones. And if we have to release with a bunch of other interrelated parties, probably we have to have some kind of, detailed release mechanisms to coordinate with all those folks. How that works on a Scrum team might vary from one team to another. So that's why all of these other 4 notes are on the other stuff poster. So that's what the 3 roles do. Developer, Scrum Master, Product Owner, those that are kind of 4 core behaviors across each of those. Having understood that, what I want to do is think a bit about what kinds of people we would want in each one of these roles. And then finally, what are their core goals? So we understand what these 3 roles do. Let's talk about the kinds of people we would want doing this stuff in each role, okay? And if you want to kind of use thumbs up, thumbs down as we go through, or type in chat as I ask questions, you can do that as well. But let's start with developers. What kinds of people would I want in the role of developer on a Scrum team? You tell me. Technical. Yes, Wendy says technical. Absolutely, yes. People with the technical skills to do the work, whatever the work is. So if we're talking about a software team, I want developers who know how to build and test software and maybe do documentation and some other things. If we're not doing software, I will want people with the tech skills to do whatever that work is, whatever it is. And collectively, all of the skills so that as a group, they could get to done in a single sprint. So not just technically skilled, but also collectively cross-functional. Now, individually, if they're cross-functional too, that's great, but that's not a strict requirement. It's better as it's the harder requirement is just as a collective, are they cross-functional? Other comments in the chat here, people say being able to work and communicate well with others. Yes, absolutely. We need people who are open collaborators, people who are willing to talk to each other every day about the work, and people who are willing to be mutually accountable, who understand they are part of a team and will hold each other accountable for being part of a team. So when I talk about mutual accountability and open collaboration, I mean, when a developer asks another developer, hey, are you stuck on that thing? Is it done yet? You said you were going to finish it yesterday. Is it done? That should not be a controversial conversation on a Scrum team. That's an everyday conversation on a Scrum team. So that's the kind of people we would want in the role of developers. Not just people who are technical, but people who are technical and part of a cross-functional team. People who are willing to talk to each other about the work and understand that they are mutually accountable as a team for delivering. We are all accountable for delivery. Now let's swing to the other side. How about product owners? Do product owners need to be technical? Do they need to understand the nuts and bolts of how the work is going to get done? No, not necessarily. They don't, because that's what developers are for. What do they need to have a detailed understanding of? If it's not necessarily technical stuff, what should the product owner understand more than anybody else? And I've seen comments in the chat here, the overall picture, business objectives, organization. Yes, especially the business vision. Yes, very good. So more than anybody else, the product owner needs to be an expert in what is the thing that we are building, how does it fit in to the overall business or mission domain that we are a part of. And that would mean being able to answer questions like, who are our users? How do we talk to them? How are we going to derive value from this thing? How do we get value from our users, or whatever it is? All of that context. How should we build things? What should we build in order to deliver value? All of those are questions I would expect product owners to either know the answers to or know who to talk to get answers when we need them. So that's what the product owner should know more than anybody else. In addition to that knowledge, product owners also need a couple of key superpowers that make them able to be the product owner. They need the authority to make choices and the willingness to make choices. One without the other doesn't help us. In fact, most often when I'm looking at dysfunction on a Scrum team related to product ownership as a coach, that's where the dysfunction lies. Someone who is called product owner, but either isn't allowed to or won't make choices, or sometimes both. So we need someone who can make choices and is also allowed to, rather than someone who is just acting as a proxy for the person who actually has the authority but won't be engaged with the team, or all sorts of other anti-patterns that pop up around the product owner role. Finally, in terms of product owner qualifications, and this is also a great skill for the Scrum Master and developers too, but it's really critical for product owner. I want someone who can think empirically. That really just means someone who can look at a problem and slice it up into a bunch of smaller experiments so that we can adjust and adapt our plans along the way. A good product owner understands I don't have to know the answer to every question about the product up front. Instead, I can carve out a small question, ask the team to build something that we can use to get feedback, and then we can get feedback and adapt our plans based on what we learned. That's empirical thinking. And that's really where we get a lot of the benefit in terms of delivering return on investment using an agile approach like Scrum. It's the ability to do a small thing, get feedback, and then course correct, so that one, we can only go in the wrong direction for so long without getting noticed that we're going in the wrong direction. And two, we can adapt to changes in the environment as they go along. Without empiricism, we don't get that benefit, and there's not really a lot of point to Scrum. All right, so that's product owner and developers. Last, let's talk about the qualifications of a Scrum Master. Does the Scrum Master need to be technical, like the developers? Not really, but it helps. You're absolutely right, Giovanni. It can help. It can also hurt. It's certainly not required. The Scrum Master doesn't necessarily need to be technical because I have a bunch of developers who are technical. If the Scrum Master does happen to come from a technical background related to the work that this team is doing, if the developers are arguing around some tech issue, then hey, maybe the Scrum Master can weigh in and support a point of view as well. That could be useful. On the downside, if the developers are arguing about some aspect of technology, the Scrum Master who happens to be technical might weigh in with their own point of view, which might not be as helpful as helping the team float up a level to understanding why are we arguing about this in the first place? What's a pattern of conflict that is constructive rather than destructive around this issue, so we don't pull ourselves apart as a team. So being technical as a Scrum Master can help sometimes. It could hurt too. It's not a strict requirement. Does the Scrum Master need to know a lot about the business, like the product owner? No, because that's what the product owner's for. They will probably come to know a lot about the business domain as a part of being this team, just as the developers will too, but it's not a strict requirement for their work. Instead, what do they really need to know a whole lot about if they are going to coach this team to get good at Scrum? What should they know about more than anybody else in this team, probably? Alan says Scrum in the chat. Absolutely, Scrum. They should know more about Scrum than anybody else on this team if they're going to be a coach. They should have seen it before, been on a team before, ideally been a Scrum Master before. Now, that doesn't mean that we can't put somebody new in the role. It just means if they're brand new to Scrum and the role of Scrum Master, they're going to need support. They're going to need good training and maybe access to senior Scrum Masters or good Agile coaches who can help them grow into the role. Also, they're going to need to know a lot if part of their job is owning and resolving impediments. They're going to need to know a lot about this particular organization. How does work happen here? How do we get to done? What's the process for that? What's the process for this? What's the form we have to fill out to get this fixed? All those kind of things. All of that internal dynamic stuff, all of those operational relationships that help us fix problems and get rid of issues for teams. That's super important for Scrum Masters to understand as well. Next up, someone said team dynamics in the chat. Barbara, yes, I really need the Scrum Master more than anybody else to be an expert communicator. Now, it helps if developers are good communicators. They at least need to be able to talk to each other. Great product owners are often really good communicators because they're negotiating consensus with stakeholders who might disagree about stuff. But Scrum Masters, because they're coaching all of those interactions, need to be amazing communicators, world-class listeners, super good at facilitating group interactions that lead to progressive behavior rather than anti-patterns like groupthink, which is how a bunch of smart people make horrible choices. I see a question in the chat about what is org SME. So subject matter expert is SME. Org SME just means an expert in how this particular organization works, how things get done and finished and fixed here. The last qualification that is maybe the most important.
Well, I thought on a Scrum team, the organization doesn't matter because you're in the 9-person team. So I'm confused. What do you mean by organization?
Well, in this case, so let's say the team works in some company. The team has to understand how to work with each other, but also, especially the Scrum Master is going to have to understand how does this team interface with the organization so that we can get problems fixed when we need to. Because the team probably doesn't exist in a vacuum. They probably exist as part of a more complicated enterprise somehow, and they have to maybe interact with other teams, other parts of the business, whatever it is. So a Scrum Master understands how can we effectively talk to other groups when we need to is really useful. Does that make more sense, Rhonda?
Yeah, I mean, it does, but I thought that the Scrum Master is only concerned with the team, so.
Well, they're concerned with the team as a coach. They are also an external facing coach as well, helping the organization get better at being a place that can nurture agile teams. So yes, they are also often focused on the interfaces between the team and the rest of the organization.
Okay.
Yep. Great question, though. So thanks for asking. The last qualification of Scrum Masters that's super important is if the most important part of their job is servant leadership, the single most important qualification for them is service mindset. That means the Scrum Master should be somebody who likes and wants to take care of people. Don't take the most curmudgeonly misanthrope in your organization and make them the Scrum Master. It's not going to work out well. This is fundamentally a people person job. And that's actually what makes filling the role of Scrum Master one of the most difficult questions for organizations that are standing up their very first Scrum teams. Because that is often not formally a part of any prior role. So it's hard to look at the existing org chart and go, oh, this box of people should be our Scrum Masters going forward. That means good Scrum Masters could come from almost any prior role. I've met great Scrum Masters who came from kind of a developer role in the past, those who were more project managers, people who were people managers, people who were in HR, administrative assistants, really all walks of life might become great Scrum Masters if they have especially the people skills and the service mindset. The Scrum stuff, I can teach somebody. Organizational stuff, they can pick up as they go. But really having the knack for those interpersonal skills is a really important qualifier. All right, so now we know what the 3 roles do. We have an idea of the kinds of person we would want in each of those roles. The last thing I'll talk about here is, in general, what are each of these 3 roles trying to accomplish as their core goal? And for developers, it is they want to build something to get feedback. So the developers are always trying to finish a thing to find out, hey, was that the right thing? Does it work? The Scrum Master's core goal is to make Scrum work. Help this group of people be the best Scrum team they can be. Help this organization become a place where Scrum teams can thrive. And then finally, the product owner's core goal is to maximize return on investment. That means getting the most value we can for the least effort from my team in a sprint. What is the smallest thing I could ask the team to do that would give me the most value? Those are the kind of conversations and trade-offs that product owners are having all the time. All right. So that's what the 3 roles do. What I want to close out with now is just quickly talking about whether or not the roles should ever overlap. And we'll start with, can the Scrum Master also be the product owner? And the answer here is, I'd really rather not. This is typically not a good idea. There is a baked-in conflict of interest between each of the roles. Part of what a product owner does all the time is ask the team for more stuff all the time, more stuff, please. Part of what a Scrum Master does is coach a team to give a reasonable answer for how much stuff we can build in a sprint without burning ourselves out and sacrificing quality and everybody quitting and all that kind of thing. If you are both sides of that discussion, you are likely to sacrifice one point of view for the other. So yes, the Scrum Master role typically works best as a full-time job per team. The product owner role typically works best as a full-time job, at least per product, and it might even be more than one person's work, depending how complicated the product domain is and how many teams are involved. Could the Scrum Master also be a developer? I would really rather not, again. There's not officially a rule against this in the Scrum Guide. It generally doesn't work out real well. The most functional this can be is if the Scrum Master is the Scrum Master first and then a developer with whatever time they have left over. In most sprints, that's probably not a lot of leftover time. And also for the rest of the team, it's like getting a part-time unplannable teammate, because we're going to make assumptions about what the Scrum Master / developer is going to do during sprint planning at the front of the sprint. And then somebody else has an impediment, and there goes the Scrum Master's focus, and so much for the assumptions we made during sprint planning. That's really frustrating. The bigger problem with this, though, is usually the reasons why it happens in the first place. And usually it's because an organization feels they need to have Scrum Masters to check a box to claim that they're doing Scrum, but they don't really think it's a real job. So they just tell the teams, yeah, just make it somebody from the developers, but you don't get to stop being a developer. Oh, well, whoever is the stuckee for that just got clearly told that your real job is developer, so don't invest a lot of energy in becoming a good Scrum Master, because we don't think that's a real thing. And that's typically what happens. Last one, could the product owner also be a developer? Again, this doesn't typically work out well. The product owner needs time to both be interfacing with the developers as the team and doing backlog refinement and talking about individual backlog items and how we might get them done. They also need time to be out talking to stakeholders and users to make sure we understand what is value and what's the most important thing for us to do next. When would they have time to do development? And then the other problem, again, is the conflict of interest. The product owner represents the perspective of what and why in backlog refinement. The developers represent how. If you are both sides, you're probably sacrificing one point of view for the other. You're going to be forcing teams to commit to stuff that they don't really think they can do, or that isn't safe in the name of product, or you might be committing the team to work that isn't really valuable because it's more interesting technically for you to do as a developer. And both of those are not great. So there you go. That is kind of a whirlwind overview of the 3 roles or responsibilities on a Scrum team, what they do, what kinds of people we would want doing them. What I'll do now is quickly just go through the closeout stuff, and then we can spend the rest of our time with questions. This is my contact info, and we will email it all out in a post-webinar follow-up. If you do LinkedIn, by all means, reach out and connect. Again, my Twitter is @bowtieagility. Also, please consider giving NextUp a follow on all the socials, LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, what have you. We post lots of great blog articles, also free webinars like this once a month, and all sorts of other great resources you can use to get better at these kind of things. And with that, I will go ahead and stop screen sharing and open it up for the last 10 minutes for questions. If you want to use the raise hand function, I will call on people one at a time until we run out of minutes. If you've got questions, you can type them in the chat or use the raise hand function.
Well, what do you mean by empirical mindset? Because, like you have to have the authority. If you keep asking for feedback, you can lose some of your authority. So
yeah, so empirical mindset really means being able to think experimentally. Part of why sprints are short is that every sprint, we should be building something that is potentially shippable that we can show people. And then we can ask them, is this what you wanted? Have we solved your problem yet? What else would you need to exist in this system before we could release it? And so that's what I mean by directing product empirically. Instead of big design upfront planning we're going to guess at all the answers to requirements and then build that whole thing. And then later find out we built a bunch of stuff people don't really care about, and we didn't build a bunch of things they do want. That's what I mean by empiricism. We've got a question in the chat here. What should you do if the product owner starts trying to control the how? Sometimes there's a contractor relationship that makes the development team feel they must listen to everything the product owner says. Yes, that is a problem. I've certainly been in that circumstance myself. The issue here is if the product owner is delving too deeply into how, often it's because maybe they used to do that job some years ago or whatever it is. They're probably neglecting then a bunch of the why, what, and when questions instead, because they're down in the weeds talking about methods and functions and individual tests we should be running. If we can clarify that their attention is better spent on the other stuff and we can leave it to the teams, what we can really refocus people on is outcome. How the thing got built matters less than does it do what was needed and is it safe? Is it, does it function as intended in test? Does it break anything? And if we can clarify that we can let the developers worry about that, that frees up all of your attention to go focus on the more important questions. That usually helps a lot. But the short answer is we basically have to do a bunch of coaching, and often coaching up, which means coaching and convincing people that we don't have authority over to make changes that are actually in their own best interest. So that's a very short answer to a very long problem, but other questions? We've still got a couple minutes here.
So in a product that's emergent and the customer doesn't exactly know what they want, then how do you empirically get feedback from them?
So that's actually when it's easiest to get feedback from them, because it's really difficult to put somebody in front of a blank whiteboard and say, well, just tell me all the things you're going to need it to do in a year. It's way easier to show them a guess at the solution and ask, is this it yet? It's a lot easier to react to a slice of a thing that exists and then start to get ideas about how to refine it going forward. And that's where we really get the benefit of these incremental and iterative approaches like Scrum, because we're constantly building a small slice, and then we can get feedback from representative users or stakeholders. Does this look like we're on the right track? And if not, we can make adjustments. The other benefit is if we're going in the wrong direction and that's not in fact what they needed. I know that's what I asked for, but it turns out it's not what I wanted. Well, cool, we only wasted a couple of weeks of work instead of we built the wrong thing for 6 months before finding that out. And that's the heart of really what we mean by directing product empirically as a series of small experiments. So yeah, if they don't know what they want, we can just guess, and then we can show it to them. And if that's the wrong guess, we'll try a different guess. Any other questions?
In when situation is the Scrum Master not doing the performance reviews?
Mm-hmm. So we really want the people on a Scrum team to not be the boss of anybody else in the Scrum team. But that's especially true for the Scrum Master. Scrum Masters lead from behind through consensus and negotiation. And if they have formal authority over people on their teams, it's really way too easy for them to default to because I said so in situations, especially in crises, which is where they maybe most need to be listening instead of telling. When they start to become responsible for things like performance reviews, they're now being forced to step into the role of the boss of the team instead of the coach of the team. So we really don't necessarily want Scrum Masters involved in performance reviews. It does happen though, unfortunately. So often I've been in organizations that are hyper matrixed, where everybody rolls up to some boss based on like skill sets, not what team are you on or what product or what customer or anything like that, which might mean everybody on the Scrum team has a different boss, and their bosses don't really know who they are because they have like 300 direct reports. And then they're begging around the organization, please give me some feedback I can use to do performance reviews. Aren't you their Scrum Master? Please tell me something. And now the Scrum Master is kind of forced into this uncomfortable position of, I'm supposed to be the coach and confidant of this team, but now I'm also sort of rating them, which kind of makes me their boss and undercuts the trust and openness that I have with them. That can be a very damaging situation. So what we should do is, again, coach the enterprise to understand that's not a healthy kind of way to deal with teams. In fact, more than that, we might coach the organization to understand that individualized yearly performance reviews in and of themselves aren't really a good thing to do. That's not how we motivate the best performance out of people. Instead, they mostly just waste a lot of time and become a reliable morale hit.
So Patrick, I've actually participated in performance reviews, not as a boss, but just as, to supplement information. So going back to the exercise that we did as a group, I would look at certain metrics and other reporting to provide to their actual managers. And I would provide some additional feedback just because there were times when I had more interaction on a day-to-day basis than potentially their boss.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's what I mean. Like it's not a thing I would do on purpose, but it certainly does happen to Scrum Masters. If it's happening to you as a Scrum Master, one thing I would advise you to do is be upfront with your teams and talk to them about what is the least damaging way I can do this so that I'm not inadvertently making you compete with each other, because that undercuts basically all of the healthy team dynamics we need for them to reach a level of high performance. So you could say to them, I'll only report, you tell me, I mean, I'm not going to lie, of course, but I can only report positive feedback. I could only report feedback at the level of team, which means, so-and-so's on my team in the last year, our team has done the following things. Instead of trying to parse out, this is the good team member and this is the less good team member, that's where we really want to avoid playing if we can.
That makes sense. I mean, I suppose depending on, like in certain cases, I provided certain matrix that the manager was metrics that the manager was looking for.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they can infer what they want just based off of that as well.
Yeah.
I mean, but as I said, my role was more as to supplement what they were already getting from other people in the organization.
Yeah. Yep. And so then as a coach and also as a system thinker, you might be thinking to yourself too, do these metrics even make sense? Do these metrics, are they actually capturing something real, or are they kind of fictional? And we have to be careful too that we aren't accidentally making metrics the point of the work instead of value, which is the thing that can happen too. So of course, I'm not saying that that's not what happened in your circumstance, but it's a thing that I've seen happen to Scrum Masters when they get forced to act in this way sometimes.
No, absolutely. That's a valid point. As I said, a lot of this was stuff I generated on my own and just provided as I said, to supplement.
Mm-hmm. Right. Well, thanks for that comment, Christine. Thanks for all those great questions that people asked. I hope this webinar was useful to you. We are at time now. We will send out a link with the slides and a link to the recording to participants. I hope you have a great rest of your day and that we see you again with our next webinar. So thanks for attending, everybody, and we look forward to seeing you again sometime.
Thanks, everyone.